thank you so much for, taking the time to have this meeting because basically Jesse referred your film to me after I shared a work in progress project that I'm working on. It's a photo-based series.
Mhm.
Um, I could show you a sample, but
Sure,
anyway,
sure.
beforehand, I really don't. I honestly don't want to focus on me at all. In fact, I just was so taken back by the film. The first thing that blew my mind was just what it looked like. Like, forget what it was about, but just what it looked like is so beautiful, so grand. And so Jesse suggested that you and I kind of, hang out for a bit and have a conversation. So
Sure,
thank you
sure.
so much.
Sure, sure. My pleasure.
Yeah, so tides. In the description you had mentioned you know, sort of something about the idea of technology meeting, as you said, nature or
Mhm.
the environment, which I just love because I feel like, I mean, just the like, I'm not even talking about the film at all, but just the description in and of itself, like what we consider nature, what we consider the environment, can often be a very politically determined thing.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
right? Like, is nature not whatever comes through the concrete too?
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's hard to find that dividing line. And I think that actually the fact that it does get divided is, you know, in my opinion, is part of the problem, because it's a way for us to separate ourselves from nature. There's nature out there, and then there's what we do in our houses and cities and this kind of thing.
Exactly. Exactly. And I love that you bring up the separation thing because I feel like that is, to not to pun at it, but that is the disconnection,
Mhm.
because it sort of means that our responsibility ends at this like arbitrary, wherever the concrete ends. Okay, now we're responsible for nature. And it's like,
Right,
no, all of this stuff it's all a part of it. There is no separation.
exactly.
Yeah, so I do have some like kind of more formal questions, but
Mhm.
I don't have any plans necessarily. I just kind of wanted to to sort of chat it out. But one thing that I would love to hear is like, how did you make it? The process of it is just like, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking from a production standpoint, like, how did you do this?
Well, there's sort of the technical aspects of it in terms of like, well, I created the project in After Effects and this kind of thing. But um, when I started the project, I mean, there's sort of the conceptual how did it happen, and then there's the technical how did it happen, and I can try to talk about both of those. So in terms of the more sort of conceptual angle of things to begin with, um, I had been, uh, you know, my wife and I grew up kind of in Texas and from a fairly early age, and I was born in Portugal, so my first formative experiences were of the ocean, I suppose. But we moved to North Carolina, and one thing that was very different about this space than we were living in Austin was obviously the water. And one thing that was especially nice, I think, is that we have these barrier islands. So, you can go to the beach, you can drive to the beach, and there's like the hotels and the houses and all that are just right on the beach. But then we have a few uninhabited barrier islands that I guess they're uninhabited because they're so low that you can't, people wouldn't really want to build houses on them because, that could be, they could get washed away. So Masonboro Island, where I filmed Tides, is one of these barrier islands, and it's a really long, sort of 8 mile stretch of island. And then the island itself is very is it's really kind of weird. It's very thin in terms of it's like a quarter of a mile from where I undocked the kayak to the beach, but then in between is actually also the island, but it's all salt marshes and mud flats. And when the tide goes low, it exposes all the mud flats, and then the water comes up, and everything is, you have about 3 to 5 feet of water that you can kayak on. So I had been going out there. One of my colleagues at UNCW introduced me to Masonboro Island, took me on a trip out there, probably about six or 7 years ago, I want to say now. And since that point, I had been going out. I had no intention in the beginning of making a film about it. I just really, and it's kind of like one of my favorite places to go hang out. And especially, time of day is really important. I tend to get up for trips out there. I tend to get up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning so that I can, go out there when the moon is still in the sky, and I get that first light of dawn and that kind of thing. So I had, before I even started any production on the film, I had been going out there, I guess, 5 years, and just really, again, not with any intention of making a film, but just noticing the light and the sound and how the light changed. Obviously the sun rose, but then the quality of light on the marsh grass and the water changed, and then how the audio changed as well. And I just became accustomed to knowing how light would hit things, in certain parts of the salt marsh at, certain types of day, certain times of the morning. And I think, so then when it did come time to make the film, I kind of just knew where to set the camera up. I knew if the grass was going to turn this sort of shade of orange, this is where I have to set the camera up and point it in this direction away from the sun, and so on and so forth. So I always say that even though it only took me 5 months to make the film, and I'm an animator, so 5 months is not that long. I have another film that I'm working on now that I've been working on for 3 or 4 years, and it's still got a long way to go. So 5 months is really short. But I always say the production itself took 5 months from the conception of the project to the final edit. But when I think about it, the project actually took me 5 years if I factor in the fact that I was really paying attention to the light and sound, and so I knew what animals were going to have, were going to emerge at certain times of the morning, and so on. And when I started the film, that's kind of where I began. It's just this idea of setting the camera up on a tripod, and starting again at like 4:35 in the morning, and just having the camera stationary and filming these bursts that were about half a minute or a minute long, and just getting some of the wildlife in there, boats or people passing through, and then I would let some more time go by and do another burst, and so on and so forth. But the camera's always in the same place, which is why then in After Effects it was easy to sort of cut out rectangles and show, okay, this is what's going on at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's next to what's happening at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that's kind of like technically, what I was dealing with. But that was my primary interest, was just capturing that, those changes in audio and also in light. And I was going to make like a 2 to 3 minute film that was just that. And then I really started thinking about, well, I want to also present this internal landscape as well, because I really want to create, I consider this an environmental film, and so many environmental films, and there is a purpose for this and it's useful, but so many are either sort of doom and gloom or informative, and it's like, it doesn't really connect. And then me, one of my top kind of issues that I really think about is the environment. And I don't even always connect to those films, and I think, well, if I don't connect to them and this is already an important issue for me, well, then how do people connect to something? And I think so. I wanted to get away from sort of the, the statistical and the kind of the rational, and think, well, what is my experience when I go out here? So there's the external, what I see and what I hear, and I wanted to sort of gather that, but there's also what do I think, and how, how does this area relate to past thoughts and this kind of thing. So that's where I bring like phone videos that I filmed in the past that have my son in there, and sort of more reflective thoughts, and then there's the section with the hurricane, and same thing, and then just sort of more philosophical thoughts that come toward the end of the movie. And I felt that was what kind of created the best portrait of the place, was that sort of literal portrait, but then sort of like the internal portrait. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, like, clearly, outside of the technical process is about time, but also, of course, the conceptual process is about time. And there's just so much sort of existentially there, and how you sort of created these chapters. We're really able to, they're like bite-sized chapters is what I'm trying to say, and we're really able to, the communication is very strong, let's put it that way. Like, it's you're absolutely right, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about like An Inconvenient Truth, for instance, and I'm like, I'd rather, shoot myself or like stick things in my eyes than watch this film again. It is so unaccessible,
Right.
And it's like, if we really want to talk about these issues in a meaningful way, like, how do we move away from the sort of academic, approach? And I think that this film really does it in such a beautiful way, in kind of a neat package. I actually was wondering if you have a background in academia at all, because it's just like so, sort of systemic, if you will.
Well, I mean, I do teach. I'm an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, but it's there. I think one of the great things about being in sort of more of the art side of academia is that there's a lot of freedom to, and a lot of the films that I work on are more, you don't have to, your work, your research, as they call it here, is not beholden to facts,
Right.
sort of, and the same type of, there's room for speculation and contemplation and this kind of thing.
Yeah, and that
So,
makes it more accessible. It really makes it more, you're communicating through your chosen medium, and I'm watching it, and I mean, we're connecting over this particular topic, because I think you had referenced, one of my projects, Let's Not, and even though if you look at them, they're like completely different subjects, but are they really,
right, I get that.
And so I love also that you bring up the learning process that you did with the audio, because the soundscape of the film is like, it's just so beautiful. And I was wondering, you did kind of answer the question, which is, was the audio recorded on location? Of course, I'm not speaking about the music, like the environmental soundscape. Was it recorded on location, which I think the answer is yes. And also, was it recorded at the same time as the video, or did you do some like collaging there?
I tried to, yeah. I mean, the answer to the first question is yes. It was recorded on location, but and I tried to keep the audio pretty close to whatever time frame that we were looking at. But then obviously there were little windows that popped up, with, we're at 6 a.m. and sunrise hasn't happened yet. And then there are people in boats and small rectangles. So I looked at whatever the dominant frame was, and I tried to put the sound around that. But that was also interesting to me too, is to sort of record that change in sound. And so I think especially with the first part, you really get that as well. And you, I think that's what kind of makes it interesting to me, is to see that in that audio almost in time lapse, which that was kind of another technical thing, is that I wanted some of the benefits of time lapse, but I didn't want to do time lapse. First of all, because I think that it's something that gets used a lot, and I would be afraid it would be a little gimmicky. But also, how it also kind of takes you away from the space in a little way, like when the bird flies through, or just the water coming in. You lose some of that sort of natural flow of things with more of a time lapse. So I wanted to sort of show the passage of time, but also keep the sounds and sights that you would experience while you were there.
Yeah, it's a really such a delicate, such a thin line
Mm-hmm.
between sort of the gimmick of what you're trying to convey and doing it. And I think your film did it so beautifully. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, most recently there have been a couple projects that I've been working on where it has been suggested, well, just do the time lapse. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not appropriate. And I love what you're saying about it sort of taking you away from the environment, because this is not how we experience life.
Right.
And what you created in a very technological way is a way for us, or I should just speak for myself, a way for me to experience, you know, being there in a time lapse, but without feeling like it's this, technology. Like you did
Mm-hmm.
it in such a smooth way. And even the little like the drop shadows, of the frames, it like
Mm-hmm.
it you'd think that it would remove you from that moment, but for some reason it just added to that moment and was more of like just a gorgeous, I don't really want to use the word collage because I don't think that does it justice, but all the stuff that you've added, whether it was words or the smaller frames or even the when you were talking about the cow, how you had the one of the frames came up, from the
Mm-hmm.
bottom up, and just that spread, it just so well done. So
Thank you.
well done. Um can you talk about in any way that you want, like, to you, how does the concept of time play into this work?
Um, well, one of the experiences, I'll try. I don't know if this will answer your question, but like one of the experiences that I have out there, it's like I said, I try to go out there and sort of commit some time to it. So I'll go out there at 4:30 in the morning, and then I'll come back at 10:30 or 11. And I think because you kind of enter a different time zone or a different time space, and it does, it is this sort of timeless realm. Um, and I think that's the thing too, is that that was what I wanted to sort of portray with the different rectangles as well too, is that you do in a sense feel like this elongation of time, like it feels like forever that you're out there. And a lot of times I go with friends, or I go with my son and this kind of thing, but I would say most of the time I go out there, I just go out there and it's just me. So I think not having any sort of human sort of contact, and there's a higher bird than human population and this kind of thing at that moment. You're on somebody else's time, I guess one could say. So um, yeah, I mean, does that kind of answer a
Totally.
little bit?
Yeah, there's no, I honestly, like, I mean, clearly temporality is very much at the center of this piece, and I just wonder, like, what that means to you. And so it's, frankly, I'm not even sure what it means to me. I just know I feel it. I know that it is insisting on itself. And what it is too, as you're talking, is you are bringing us to your experience, to your very personal experience of the space. Like, I think even about the I think it's towards the end, and it's the reeds where you do kind of do the jump cuts there. And it and the music is a little bit, it's got that little bit of that reverse, like Lynchian, kind of a mood. And I feel like we can psychologically understand you within those different chapters, and that's, I think, why I vibed so much and related so much to the film, because there's so much of sort of the psychological component in there. And time and psychology is pretty much everything. I mean, I have a background in psychology. I have a master's in psychology. I did not at all study Freud or psychoanalysis, but certainly he would he would relate this to the fear of death, right? And how time just keeps ticking on. But I think there's so much more to it than just something as simple as that. I'd love to know, if at all, and if you are aware, you might be, like, what is a historical sort of context of these particular, barrier islands?
You mean,
I mean,
yeah,
from
that's a
any
really,
standpoint, yeah. I mean, like, if you know environmentally, or maybe there is some, like, any sort of historical moment or something within that particular scape.
that's a really good question. I mean, I think I don't know necessarily, how they play into history, but I do know that just environmentally, there is, they are the thing that stop, and you probably know this, I'm sure, but there's such a kind of a fight over overdevelopment of the beaches, because what happens with these barrier islands, and it all used to be barrier islands at one point, so maybe that's something historical, but so in the area where I live, we have like Wrightsville Beach and Carolina Beach, and those are the developed. I mean, they're also barrier islands. You have to cross a bridge to get to them, and so they're the same kind of shape, and and that kind of thing as Masonboro Island, which is the undeveloped one. But they've been built up, and a lot of ecologists argue that, yeah, this is what's causing more hurricane damage in our areas, because they don't have, like, those islands no longer have the trees and the brush and all the things that would protect them from sort of more inland areas. So I mean, that's kind of, I think, the extent of my knowledge in terms of like how this ties into sort of a broader human scope.
Yeah, no, I think that totally informs it. I think that totally informs it. I mean, the fact that you go on there with a kayak, and the segment where you dropped your phone, that's very much related to the conservation component of this place. And I even wonder if you ever, when you go there, do you ever feel like you're an invasive species, as you're like treading through the water?
I think it depends on how I do that. I mean, I guess that's part of my philosophy is like, as long as I don't throw candy wrappers in the marsh, or as long as I don't like plow my kayak through all the cord grass, I have as much a right to be there as any of the other animals. So and I think there could be sort of an environmental guilt that a lot of people feel, and I think some of that makes sense, because we've definitely had an impact on the planet, but I also think that if I have to sort of speak in pronouncements, I think that for me that's part of the problem, is that we shouldn't, I think, by by having, if I were to feel guilty about being there, that would sort of defy the whole connection with nature that I do have when I go there. So
I love that. I love that. It really kind of speaks to sort of extreme thinking,
mhm,
and it's like in either direction, it's too much. And there's got to be sort of a middle ground, because we are animals. We are
mhm,
clearly a part of this place. And to feel, to come in from the more like, I feel guilty about like even, putting my foot down on this particular ground,
mhm.
because there might be some underground worms or creatures that I might be stomping over. I think that really stops us from being a part of the environment, which is probably what we should start aspiring to become.
Mhm.
So I love that. I love that, you're owning both the ecological impact, as well as saying, but I'm a part of this ecology very much.
Right. Yeah, and I think in terms of like, I mean, you bring up the sort of the stepping on that. I'm not. I obviously, yeah, I don't want to go around and stomp on the oyster beds, but I think if you don't, if people don't go out there and they don't learn how to be out there in a way where, I mean, that's a given. Obviously, you wouldn't stomp on the oysters, but there might be other things that we would do that we don't even know that we're kind of, harming the sort of the like the natural flow of things. But I don't think that means we shouldn't be out there. It just means I think we just have to learn how to be out there, and um,
Responsibly.
yeah, I mean I think that's the only way. That's kind of my thought, is that's the only way any of this will ever get any better, is like not through the Disney Channel kind of showing kids how to recycle or that kind of thing, but it's like, no, you actually have to be out there, because I always look at it like a family. Like if you never knew your family, your parents and that kind of thing, or your brothers, sisters, siblings, this kind of thing, you wouldn't really have a connection to them. I mean, you would have this sort of like conceptual idea of like, oh, these people are very important. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't be born. And or these people all share DNA with me. But like, you wouldn't, you wouldn't feel that connection. And I think it's the same thing with me, and sort of being out in these areas is like, you have to. And even like one of the classes that I teach is called Classroom in the Wild, and it's for that very reason. You know, um, I had a lot of students, I think, start to make films, and they just kind of recycled some of these concepts. They were recycling some of these concepts about like, wind turbines are important, and sea turtle, but it was all the talking points. And I kept trying to get them to think about like, but what is you're just telling me what somebody else told you. What does all this mean to you? And I think um, I think that was sort of the impetus for wanting to start this class, where one of the things I do is I take them and we rent kayaks and we go out to Masonboro Island, and all they do is record image and sound, and they're called field videos, and then they sort of just put them together. In fact, that's actually, I totally had forgotten about that. I started teaching that class before I made this film. And I think taking my students out there, I was like, I should do I should do one of these field videos. And that's one way I got started.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. Yeah, one of the, my biggest sort of complaints about academia is that we're just reading other people's
Hmm.
research, and those
Hmm.
other people are doing meta analysis of other people's research. And even if you are doing, research from scratch, it's in a lab setting, and it's like, well, how does this actually inform life? And
Hmm.
so to sort of shift that over to the art world, and specifically the film world, and to have students actually come out and like work in the field is so beautiful, because that's when a real connection is made. Because you could take the stuff that you've learned in your research, and the whatever the hazards are to the sea turtle, etc., but then you move that into a real life experience, and the two start informing each other.
Hmm.
And I think that that's so beautiful. Man, if
Exactly. Yeah.
if I taught, which I look forward to doing, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I also love that it that it might have been sort of the main impetus to even
Yeah.
starting the project.
I had totally forgotten about that. But I've also been kind of influenced by, I mean, I am influenced by sort of, I guess, thinkers and this kind of thing, but they tend to, I think they tend to operate outside of academia or, and that's just, there's one Charles Eisenstein that I follow some of his work, but he kind of has this idea of like, even if we were to go completely carbon neutral, and if we were, I mean, he talks about more than just sort of the environment, because for him, he looks at the whole phenomenon of us on the planet is from a more holistic perspective. But one thing that I remember him saying in one of his books was this idea that even if we went carbon neutral, and even if like everything was green and we did everything right, we would still be doomed, because the thing that wouldn't change was our kind of relationship, to this sort of more holistic relationship to the environment or to nature. It would be very sort of clinical.
Right. Yeah, I wrote his name down because that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to read a little bit more about that. I have no comment on that. I'm not sure I've ever actually thought about it. I mean, on a base level, again, to bring up Freud, yeah, like no matter what, we are doomed, right? Like that's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not trying to be all morbid here. I don't know why this is sort of, I'm taking this weird turn, but yeah, at the end of the day, it kind of does go back to, your contention of we are a part of the environment. We should own our sort of the fact that we are among the other animals and we're not separate from them. Again, it's that like the connection to sort of back into the world, rather than like how do we sort of recycle more. Ideology is just, it's not helping, and I completely agree. And I'm not sure that I've ever really considered that in such, looking at it in such terms. Yeah, the series that I've started working on, and I think why Jesse connected us, is me going out into, again, nature.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Los Angeles, specifically in a city called Glendale,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very urbanized. Houses, apartments, giant, business offices everywhere. But then on the outskirts, we're surrounded by mountains.
Right.
And these mountains are basically regulated by the city, county, state to be left the hell alone. So we have what are called open spaces, and we're able to enjoy them. It's available to everybody because, it's all public land. And I've been going there with my camera, both digital and film camera. And for whatever reason, I started creating this like frame and frame, like large scale works that sort of defines my experience psychologically with the environment, with the sort of wild landscape and the controlled way that we look at it. So I'm not even sure why I just brought that up, but I feel like I guess it bears saying as to why I was just so wanting to have a conversation with you about this film, this project. Let's see. I have a couple questions that you've already answered. Oh, yeah. So I think I know the answer, but I'd love to ask it anyway. So as one example, you were talking about the sea cow, which is just like, that section was so just utterly beautiful. But I do wonder why you never showed the cow, right? Like there was no footage of the cow. And this is not like a judgment call or anything. I'm just curious.
There actually was. But it's so abstracted that
I missed it.
It's kind of abstracted, and you have the link. It's actually it's the chapter header, and it's called the sun and moon of things, and it's like this sort of black and white, grainy, and all you really see is this like kind of spine poking up out of the sand, and like maybe some of the dried skin on either side, but it is in there. But that was kind of like the only that was the only record I have of that, because I had taken that, I guess, in almost a full year earlier. It was the first time when I took that photo. It was the first time I went out after the hurricane, and this was like probably we've lived here for 15 or 16 years, and it was definitely the worst hurricane that we had here, and maybe for the past 20 or 30 years in the Cape Fear region. So it had flattened the landscape and done all sorts of weird things. And, as I say, it would not be out of the realm. I mean, it would not have been out of the realm of possibility for like cows and pigs and that kind of thing. Yeah, right. But it was, that one photo that I took, I went ahead and I brought it back in. And I didn't expect people to kind of like necessarily make that connection, but. Yeah.
No, well, I certainly didn't, but now I have to, because as I'm thinking back about the chapter headers, I'm not sure that I even realized what the hell I was looking at. It was very abstracted. So
Yeah.
I definitely am going to click back on it and take a deeper look at it. That's awesome. Was it?
Go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say that, so that was the one that was kind of like an image, like a photograph. The other two are actually Google satellite photos, and they're both from the place where I set up the camera. So, and then go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say, one, I think they were both, the other two photos that were part of the chapter headers were, the Google satellite. And the one that comes at the end, I wanted, since I say that that satellite images of the salt marsh look like cross sections of human lungs, and I guess it's human lung tissue or something under a microscope. I wanted to I had that little image in there to show, it actually does look like a little air sacs and all that kind of thing. It's bizarre.
That's so awesome. In fact, I have an experience years and years ago. We went to the beach and we saw a beach dead something. Mm-hmm. And it had teeth. And I was like, what the hell kind of sea creature has like a whole set of teeth? And now I wonder if it was a manatee.
Yeah, right.
They're gigantic. They're very, very interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a live one, but I know they swim in this area. So so that was most likely it.
I wonder, in terms of the hurricanes, and of course, I don't necessarily expect you to know any definitive answer to this, but I wonder if also the impetus for documenting this area in time has something to do with the fear of like it not being here, sometimes in the near future.
Well, it will be the first. Yeah, those areas will be the first things to go away. And I would think so too. I mean, I had spent I went camping out there twice, once with my son, once by myself, but also just all the time that I spent out there. And it was kind of a shock to then go back after the hurricane. And it was just like a parking lot practically. I mean, it was just flat. Whereas before, like there were these dunes and like all the grasses and brush and this kind of thing. But what's kind of hopeful, I guess, is that the dunes have since started. I mean, it's a very long process, but the dunes have started rebuilding again. So it's almost like they're living things. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something like these will be the first things to go. They do say, again, this is one of the statistical things, but like, do we hear it living in this area that, so there's a interstate I-95 that's 100 miles inland from us. And that's the one thing that, if the sea levels rise, what is it, like 30 feet, that will be the new coastline is where I-95 is. And that's like, 100 miles. So just to give an idea of how low lying all of this area is.
Yeah, and precarious, the precarity of that entire thing. But I think it's, again, I mean, it really all speaks about the same thing, which is you're talking about the sand dunes rebuilding
Hmm.
themselves. That's sort of it. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's sort of what, your film is ultimately endless. It and even without you being out there filming it, we know after having watched it that the stuff keeps going, keeps returning,
Right.
receding, and it's just so so beautiful. And of course it leads me back to a little bit of like my philosophy, which is, we have this like Judeo-Christian idea about how important we are. I'll even throw Buddhism in there, fuck it. And throw it all, Islam, let's throw it all under the bus. But like we have these ideologies about how important we are, and ultimately, once we're gone, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us, this stuff's going to keep happening,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that's sort of another component that needs to be discussed when we're talking about environmental studies, when we're talking about climate change.
Right. Yeah. There is this. Yeah. I mean, I think that's. I really take issue with, when people say, we've got to save the Earth. It's like the Earth doesn't need saving. The Earth will, it's, if you're wanting to save something, you're talking about saving yourself and saving not just yourself, but all the animals and trees and everything, life as you know it. But the Earth has been through way worse, with. And if you look at the 4 billion year history, and it will go on, until it doesn't. So,
Exactly. And
but I mean,
that's
it's
yeah.
interesting. Well, it was just interesting that you mentioned the different religions, because one of the quotes in there is from a Zen. I think the Suzuki Roshi, who brought Zen Buddhism to the United States, where it's like the quote being, "Life is like stepping on a boat which is about to go out to sea and sink." And to me, that's a funny quote because it's just, you think it's going to start out with this grand, like, we're going to conquer and achieve. And it's like, nope, that's it.
I
So,
love that. It actually really it really speaks about this whole like positive affirmation movement, that it's just like, that's not life. That's half
yeah,
of life, or maybe like
yeah,
25% of life,
right.
but there's all this other stuff that, we're just not talking about. And the koans are usually very much going to remind us about
Hmm.
all of life.
Right.
Absolutely. What else? Let's see. Do I have any other questions? Yeah. Um, a couple. Actually, just I think just one. So I think it was more toward the end, when you sort of explain a little bit your reasonings, or kind of you explain a little bit your reasonings for framing stuff. And then
Hmm.
you kind of throw out this really interesting idea, which is, you know we have this urge or whatever to divide physical space. And I wondered if I can ask you, why do we need to do this? Why do we do this?
Why do we need to divide physical space?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I guess I could, I guess I could speculate. But I think it's just the way, that we've, I always, this is another thing that I don't agree with, it, that we've started, the, our destruction of the environment is because of, gas, fossil fuels and gas and this kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, those are symptoms, but, um, I really think back to sort of when the Cartesian mindset came along, where it was about dividing, trying to find, um, the answers to, all the questions of the universe by breaking things down into their constituent parts, trying to, but as they say, you can dissect the dog, but you can never find the bark. There is something there that sort of eludes breaking things down. Does that kind of answer your
Totally,
question? Yeah.
totally. It's really hilarious how everything always comes back to Descartes, and like
Mhm.
how how his framing of the world just really took us in a very interesting direction, very much
Mhm.
away from connection, from sort of inner connection, really, and into this like compartmentalizing and splitting and dividing. Um, I always joke around, but I took an intro to psychology class I think right when I started my bachelor's degree, and seriously, all of the material that I learned there is what I keep coming back to, and it's almost as if the rest of the classes were just like add-ons.
Oh, wow.
Because it's all kind of like there in 101, how essentially it was a philosophical argument that turned into this sort of scientific study, and we sort of ran with it in a Cartesian fashion, rather
Well,
than yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think, I heard something recently that makes me think, maybe it could even be before then. I heard this interesting, I think this is Douglas Rushkoff, who's a media theorist, and he talks about, uh, that during the Renaissance, like this time that we look at is this like huge time of progress, and in many ways, it's arguable that it was, but he says, it was when artists developed perspective. But he was like, really think about it. What does perspective do? I have my perspective, you have your perspective, everybody has their perspective, which means that they're kind of, they're taking themselves out, and they're separating themselves out, and they're looking at a thing from their perspective. Whereas if maybe you look at art, pre-Renaissance, it was much more symbolic, so you were part of the art, you were in the world of the art. And it wasn't really about having a different perspective. It was about that it was this idea that, that the art was created, and everybody sort of shares in this sort of universal experience. I know I'm kind of taking liberties to paraphrase, but I found that interesting, the idea that, maybe perspective, this idea of perspectival painting and perspective, has its sort of drawbacks, or it's like, shadowy side to it as well.
Right, especially when we assume, or have been assuming for many, many decades and perhaps even centuries, that that is the one perspective to look at it
Hmm.
from, which is
Yeah.
of course an extremely egocentric way of doing it, rather than if you're working in symbols, and we know that you're working in symbols, then we are entitled to our interpretation of that
Hmm.
work, which again, sort of leads back to your work. It's not academic, it's not preachy in any way, it's not a documentary in a sort of formalistic way, but it's real. You were there. um but it's very, very, very symbolic. It really is, and it allows us to have a very lengthy conversation about it. And I don't have any more questions, but certainly I'm sure someone else, like if Jesse had a session with you and he asked questions, there might be a whole other slew of questions outside of the technical component, because my God, what a feat. Seriously, what a
Well,
technological
thank
feat.
you.
It's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested too. You mentioned symbols, and like, one thing that like, I feel like I've talked about so many things I have issue with, but yeah, I mean, being a filmmaker, you hear it's almost like a mantra. It's like, it's all about the story. It's all about the story. And it's like, well, maybe not. Maybe it can be if you're making a narrative film, or even a documentary film, a certain type of documentary film. Maybe it's about the story, but I found that that doesn't resonate with me um, completely, because I think symbol is, especially more and more with some, because I do a lot of animation, as I mentioned, and I really try to look at the kind of looking at things as different symbols, and this kind of thing, borrowing from a lot of sort of ancient symbols, symbology, meaning of number, and this kind of thing, and just sort of overlaying these things on top of each other. And so, maybe that's, if you want to count that as a story, I suppose. But I think the people who say story is everything, they may not be talking about sort of the more symbolic story or metaphor, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting because I think that when people perhaps talk about having a story, they mean that they're going to tell you what you're
Mhm.
watching. And I
Right.
feel like your piece and pieces like more of the poetic films, they don't, you may not have a story, but I'm going to make up a story in my mind. and,
Right.
and that's one of my favorite freedoms in film watching. That's why I
Mhm.
love like watching Tarkovsky, for instance, right? Because he might have his story, but he's all about what was the experience that people went through within this particular world that I've created. And then it's up to you to experience it as you wish, Mir being one of the more extreme examples of that. So absolutely. I think it really is interesting that you bring that up, because I always say that I'm all about storytelling, but I wonder if I need to sort of reframe that a little bit, because when I make images, or when I'm making films, I try, I don't know that I always succeed, but I try not to be heavy-handed about it.
Mhm.
Not to say, hey, this is the way that this thing is, and this is the only way that you should
Right.
look at it. Yeah, like essentially not being plot driven, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess the word story is really open to interpretation. And I don't even think, like, like, I enjoy watching films that have a story, but I also enjoy films that don't have like an obvious story as well. I think my point is to say there's room for all of it. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And what you want to make, and being
Hmm.
honest with what it is that interests you.
Hmm.
David Fincher is obviously all about story. Spielberg is all about story, and those are some of like the best films that we have, or best filmmakers, I should say, that we have. But you're absolutely right. There's room for all of it. And I also think there's something really beautiful about being more symbolic, because then I feel like you are, it's a way of sort of telling the audience you're smart enough to figure this out in your own way. Like, I don't need to spell anything out for you,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, sometimes I think it's even fun when, you know, uh, people, like, I think if it is open to interpretation, sometimes people will find something there that I didn't even know was there. And I'm like, I think you're right.
That's one of
And
my
I don't know if that's
favorite
like,
things.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one of my favorite things. And in fact, I have this idea of when I do a series, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to write anything about it. Now, of course, I understand that in the visual world, that's sort of like a necessary component of the thing, that you are going to talk about it. But the way that I try to sort of mitigate that is just by talking about my experience about it, and not saying this is what this is about.
Hmm.
because it
Right.
because I think when I do that, I've already clouded your perspective of it, and now any sort of original thought that you might have of it might be, squashed, and I want to hear that. For instance, the let's not and say we had a little, Jesse and I had like a chat book that
Hmm.
we printed, we produced, and a gardener looked at it, and his perspective, and I actually don't remember exactly what he said, but what I do remember is that his perspective was so wonderfully unique that I was like, I felt like I've succeeded in, creating a work that made this particular person think about the world in a different way, and not me sort of prescribing, this is what I'm showing you here.
Well, and for me, when I saw it, I mean, one of the things that I enjoyed, and I don't know why I make this connection, but as I'm of course living in North Carolina now, but I spent um, many years in Austin, Texas, and there's something about the photos that it recalls for me my kind of experience. It recalls my experience living in Austin, because Austin is, I mean, the sort of informal slogan of Austin is keep Austin weird. And you know, Austin, especially when I was growing up there, was kind of an unusual place, and you would see really, you know, kind of, you know, things that you might not see everywhere. And I don't have that same perspective now where I live. You know, this is a completely different environment where I live now. But I think that was kind of, there's something kind of nostalgic looking at your photos. Sort of the, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really enjoyed.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really have any more questions. We could talk about anything else if you want, or we can, you know, we can call it a day. It's completely up to you.
I have a few more minutes, and then I have a meeting coming up. But yeah, I mean, I guess you know, yeah. Is there any? I mean, since is there any place you would like to take this in a few minutes, or any?
No, really, no. Like I'm tapped out. I just want to say that it was my utter pleasure to have watched it. I'm so glad for Jesse to have connected us. Oh, actually, I will show you. Oh, let's see. One sec.
Oh wow, very cool. That's great. Yeah, and that's the natural. That's crazy. That's okay. So I'm looking at like are those black and white? Are those like historical? Like,
Nope.
wow.
These are all sort of made around the same time. I've recently picked up a medium format film camera. So these are film images, and then obviously this is a digital, maybe not obviously, but this is a color digital image. And I showed Jesse, and he was like, "Oh, you have to see tides," and you know.
Yeah.
And then I saw
that's
like,
great.
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool. I especially the one, the mountain range where, you know, it really, because when I saw the other ones, I'm like, okay, those kind of like you know, it progressively becomes more, which I kind of like too. It progressively becomes more connected, I think, to like literally connected. Like the one with the mountain range, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like the perfect. And then I see it looks like a girl, or who's that? So at first I thought it was somebody dancing, but now I see it's somebody sitting down, and I'm like, okay, wait, that, and then you know, and then the one at the bottom, well, that could be, you know, that could just be a sort of a graphic match, but not necessarily in the environment. So I like the way I kind of like start looking, and then progressively I'm like, oh, those are all photos of the same place.
Yep. Even though
and how far apart in time were those taken?
I think these two.
Oh, I don't know if you're frozen up.
I think. Oh,
maybe I'm frozen.
No, you're good. I mean, I see you. Am I back? It's probably all the moving. It might be all the moving. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
The girl squatting in the bushes was taken around the same time as the mountain. The mountain range in the back was taken in a whole other location at a separate time, and it's a dead crow in the sand, that
Right,
bottom
okay.
one, and that was taken in a whole other time. And so that's why I really wanted to, I'm not sure what time means to me for the series, but it certainly plays a key role. The other thing that plays a key role is scale. And I think that this particular image that I showed you will be much, much, much larger. I just don't have the wall space to do it at this time, but I want to make it so large, and then force you to sort of come in and look at all these details. And then just really mess around with scale throughout this series.
Yeah, I like that, you know, the color is really vivid, but then you have like the black and white is also really sort of like tangible and vivid as well. And there was one other, I'm trying to remember what this person's name was, and you might have heard of this. Um, there's a graphic novel. The author's name is Richard Mcguire.
Hmm.
It's called Here. Have you heard of that at all?
No.
I can try to share. I'll share a panel from, but this is basically, I think, or yeah, you can look it up. It's Here. It's Richard Mcguire, and basically, what he does is he illustrates like a corner of a living room,
Hmm.
and then he starts, and I think this is also what inspired the film as well, because I'm working on another film, and then one of my friends was like, oh, you should check out this graphic novel Here, and then I looked at the graphic novel, and then it helped inspire Tides, because of other things that I was talking about. But yeah, it's like, you know, there's just like the setting is a
Oh.
living room, and then, you know, he changes out panels, and it's like, but it's like on this epic scale where, you know, in most of the panels, it's like, you know, 1955, here's what was happening in this space in this house. And then, you know, 1978, this is what was happening. But then yeah, right. And then and then you have the buffaloes. It's like before the house ever gets built. And then one of the panels was like, you know, 1911 when they were building the house. So it's like you saw the skeleton of the house. So that's kind of a really interesting.
Oh yeah, I'm going to sink my teeth into that. That is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, well, thank you for your
Awesome.
interest in the film, and I enjoyed, you know, hearing and seeing more, you know, finding out more about your own work. So great.
Well, have a wonderful rest of the day.
All right. Well, you too. Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.